I'm Anna Maria Tremonti. This is The Current.
We are at war with radical Islamic terrorism.
Right,
we
not
are at war
all
whether
Islam.
you like it or whether you
Not
don't like
all
it.
Islam.
They are looking
Everybody
to come
knows
over.
who we're
They
at
are
war
looking
with.
to do great damage. You look at what's going on in the Middle East. They're chopping off heads. They are looking to come over to other places too, and they want the jihad.
Right,
it's very simple.
You're
they
saying,
want the jihad.
You're saying, what does that mean? They want the jihad.
Well, that was U.S. Republican presidential hopeful Donald Trump yesterday speaking with CNN's Chris Como and defending his controversial proposal to ban Muslims from entering the United States. The escalation in Mr. Trump's rhetoric came on the heels of last week's mass shooting in California, which authorities deemed an ISIS-inspired terror attack. But the idea of keeping Muslims out of the country has been roundly condemned from inside his own Republican Party, from the White House, from European leaders, from Egypt, Pakistan, and elsewhere. Still, Mr. Trump continues to lead the race for Republican presidential nominee in many opinion polls, and his proposed entry ban was loudly cheered by the supporters who were in the audience with him when he made the announcement. Today, we are looking at the ramifications of that rhetoric for Muslims both north and south of the U.S. border and asking what kind of actions words such as Mr. Trump's can trigger. Khalid Hamida is a lawyer and spokesperson for the Islamic Association of North Texas. He joins us from Dallas, Texas today. And Tendesai Cromwell is a writer and filmmaker who produces documentaries on faith, spirituality, and diverse communities. She's with me in our Toronto studio. Hello to you both.
Hi.
Hello.
Khalid Hamida, let's begin with you. How have you been affected since Donald Trump's call to block Muslims from entering the U.S.?
Well, Donald Trump's rhetoric from the beginning of his campaign has had a negative effect on all of us as Muslims, and actually they've had a negative effect on all Americans. They conjure up images of Japanese Americans in concentration camps, and quite honestly, they conjure up images of the Holocaust. This exceptionalism and isolation that he seems to provoke hasn't worked in the past, hasn't worked for the Soviet Union or China, will not work in the U.S., and basically he is espousing a ideology of hate and intolerance, which won't work here.
There's going to be a protest this weekend outside the mosque that you go to and have gone to for decades. What's going to happen there?
This is a small group of about, the last time that they showed up, about 11 or 12 individuals. The law enforcement community here has them under their radar. They make a lot of noise, but they do show up with guns, so we're fearful and hopeful that they won't do anything. But, you know, you never know because of the rhetoric, because of everything that's going on in our society and the hate that's being, infiltrated our society from this right-wing push to hate all Muslims, regardless of them being, like my family here for at least 100 years, all being professionals, all being good tax-paying citizens. We're fearful that one of these crazies will use one of those guns. So it's always an atmosphere of heightened pressure, and anybody that's coming to pray, it's a holy place of worship, anybody that's coming to pray has to walk through armed security guards. It's reminiscent of the 60s when people had to go inside of black churches but had to go walk through armed security guards.
How long have you had armed security guards at your mosque?
Well, we don't usually have them. Just only recently when all of this stuff started happening, we don't have armed security guards. We have an open place that is open 24/7 for anyone who wants to come in, whether Muslim or otherwise.
It can't be a good feeling.
It's a terrible feeling, and I can't believe we're living this kind of life in 2015. I can't believe the words that are coming out of this guy's mouth. I mean, he's just so reckless, and the on-the-ground consequences for regular, everyday Muslims are astonishing. People are afraid to take their kids to school. Women are afraid to go to the grocery store. They're afraid to go to the shopping mall. They're afraid of being attacked, and this is a direct consequence of words like this from this gentleman.
Tendesai Cromwell, you're here on the Canadian side of the border. How are you feeling the consequences of this rhetoric?
Well, just to echo what Khalid said, It's been quite saddening because as a Muslim woman, I felt vulnerable for the first time ever on Canadian streets. I've never felt as vulnerable as I do now. And so as a result of this hate rhetoric that's been taking place both in the United States and in Canada and elsewhere, I actually decided to do a self-defense class for Muslim women. And what occurred was that we felt that because of our vulnerability, we needed to come together and, ensure our safety. And it was quite sad for us to have to do that at this time. Yeah.
You brought in a martial arts person to actually run a class.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. So what happened was that in the aftermath of Paris, there was this palpable sense of fear, as I said, and studies showed, at least the studies in France show that Islamophobic attacks are perpetrated mainly towards visible Muslim women, and it's not men that are receiving the brunt of these attacks. So to me, this is first and foremost really is a feminist issue of violence against women, and so we took it upon ourselves to sort of organize as many different classes that took place across Toronto and elsewhere. And yes, I brought a Muslim woman martial artist to come in and instruct us on a Friday evening where others might be planning their weekend and having fun. We were coming together for fear of being attacked.
Well, and since the Paris attacks, a mosque in Peterborough, Ontario was set on fire. 2 Muslim women in Toronto were harassed and called terrorists. Another Toronto woman was assaulted. This is the thing that motivated you to have that class.
Absolutely, definitely.
And so when Donald Trump says what he says about Muslims and not allowing Muslims into the United States, you live near a border. What goes through your mind? How does that change how you think about what you do?
Well, personally, I don't take Donald Trump's anything he says seriously. However, this type of hate rhetoric does have real consequences, as Khalid mentioned, that it gives rise to violence, and it kind of licenses Islamophobes to sort of perpetrate violence, as I said, against typically visible Muslim women. So I feel concerned that, that people are going to continually take to the streets and, attack Muslim women.
You wear hijab?
I do.
Have you thought about, when you walk on the streets, do you feel more vulnerable now?
I do, but I should mention the fact that because of my ethnic background and the way I wear hijab, I'm not always identified as Muslim. So I think I'm able to walk through the streets in a way that maybe my Arab or Pakistani visible Muslim sisters are not able to, with the kind of freedom of association with the religion.
And what is your background?
My background is Zimbabwean and Trinidadian.
So what you're saying is you're not obviously an Arab Muslim.
Exactly.
But how does that make you feel? What you're saying is that you're not immediately identifiable, but you're aware of that.
I'm aware of that. And in fact, I will say that sometimes I kind of endeavor to hide my expression of my faith in the way that I wear my hijab, in a way that people might perceive as more like an ethnic type of head wrap rather than a visible sort of a visible expression of my Islamic faith.
Okay, well, I want to bring someone else into this conversation. Bernie Farber is the executive director of the Mosaic Institute. It's a think tank which engages communities in discussions on peace. He's with us in our Toronto studio. He's listening to this whole conversation. What's going through your mind, Bernie Farber?
The sadness that's going through my mind is that this is not new. Certainly back in the turn of the 20th century, Jews faced very similar kinds of restrictions and very similar kinds of rhetoric. They were called, pornographers and thieves. Later on, they were called communists. Bars were put up to their entry into this country. So I understand this pain, and I understand viscerally what it means to be denied your own dignity within your faith and as a person. And what I'm seeing, sadly, and more in the United States, I have more hope for Canada, Anna Maria. But we can't help it. We live beside this giant, and they what Trump seems to have done is he seems to have tapped into the deepest and darkest recesses of our fear and of our soul. And so what this means is that there are people out there, and many won't believe this. I mean, I know many of my friends, when they heard Trump make his absurd remarks, they would say, well, this is silly and he's never going to get elected and who cares. The fact of the matter is that upwards of 30% of Americans in some way or another have glommed on to Donald Trump. That's a huge number.
He's leading in the polls.
It's absolutely remarkable. And here in Canada, while it was done in a more nuanced way, certainly when we look back at the last election, we can't help but believe that the very same kind of fear factor was part and parcel of the election campaign, the cultural barbaric practices that Harper harped on.
The snitch line.
The snitch line, the going after Muslim women wearing niqabs. I mean, it fed into that sick, almost perverted type of fear. And I would say this, as a Canadian Jew whose own uncle was murdered in the Holocaust. My father was a Holocaust survivor, but my father's brother tried to come here from Poland into the United States just as the war began. He stowed away on a boat. He was discovered, and he was sent back, and he died in the Treblinka death camp. I get this. I understand this. And my fear is that today, Muslims are the Jews of yesterday. And that troubles me just greatly, and I'm looking for ways to erase that fear and move towards the light.
Khalid Hamida, how do you respond to what Bernie's saying?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly. I think Bernie makes a excellent point that the Muslims are the Jews of the turn of the century, and if we follow Donald Trump's logic to its logical conclusion, then I mean that's exactly where he wants to put the Muslims, and you can't really put 1.5 billion of the world's population into a box like that, and we live in a global society. We all of our companies, all of our commerce, all of our currencies, all interrelated. So his message, it has dire consequences, not just for American Muslims, for America, for Canada, and for the globe, for everybody internationally. That's why everybody's coming out against this guy. And it is really sad to see that 30% of our population has latched on to his message. It's sad. And
Khalid Hamida, how have non-Muslims in your community reacted? Like you told us that there are going to be these armed protesters who come and stand outside your mosque. What about other people? Is anybody reaching out to you?
Oh yes. Like I said, the people that with the arms, there are only a handful of people. Our interfaith
but
partners,
they're armed.
Yeah, they're armed, which is the scary part. But I mean, we have received messages from our friends in the Jewish and Christian community, our interfaith partners that have basically stood by us for the last 2 decades. Anytime something like this has happened, and they've told us, if your women are afraid to go to grocery stores or the shopping malls, our women will go with them, and they're coming the same time as the protest, and they're going to be inside we're going to be holding an interfaith vigil at the same time. And our message is basically we're going to leave the hate outside and bring the love inside. So we have a lot of support from our friends in the Jewish and Christian communities. The people of faith know that this extremist element in our society, if they prevail, they will destroy society in its entirety. I mean, their message of hate resonates only with a few. But we've come together, and I think that'll make us a little stronger in the long run.
Go ahead, Bernie.
And we are seeing similar kinds of manifestations actually here in Canada. Anna Marie, you mentioned the mosque arson in Peterborough. Immediately thereafter, the small Peterborough synagogue offered their place of worship to the small Muslim community to come and worship with them on their Sabbath. And that story spread worldwide. And actually, it gave me a lot of hope. I mean, this is the kind of thing that when evil happens, goodness trumps it. And that's really, what we're looking for. On the sad part of events, we're not only seeing this in the United States and a little bit in Canada, but take a look at what's going on in Europe. In Greece, the neo-Nazi Golden Dawn Party is now the third largest party in Greece. In Denmark, the Danish People's Party is a strong member of the coalition, anti-immigrant as worse as it can get. In Sweden, the far-right Swedish Democrats are coming up in the polls. It's frightening. And I believe here in Canada, we have the ability, given the fact that we are engaged in this wonderful multicultural experiment, that I think we are showing the world how we can live together in peace, in harmony. We have to shine that light even brighter, I believe, especially in these days.
I'm interested to know what you think, Tendasai, because Bernie makes the point, it's not everyone, but there are those people as well who feel that all of this talk gives them permission to actually confront Muslim women on the street, to do that kind of thing. How do you square that? Like, how does that affect you when you walk out the door, when you take your baby for a walk?
Yes, I have a newborn daughter, and it's, I guess, bred new fears in me that not only I feel like I can handle myself, I feel a sense of empowerment, but for my young daughter who's going to grow up in a world where, you know, these attacks could happen, I fear that she won't be able to take care of herself. And so when I walk out on the streets with my, you know, other co-believers, my other visible Muslim women friends, I just don't feel like there's a sense of belonging anymore in certain ways. And I feel like the rhetoric here really is about fundamental tensions in Canadian society, about who gets to belong and who doesn't. But I do see, as you know, Bernie and Khalid mentioned, that there are some beautiful acts that have taken place. Like in the case of the TTC, there are many people who are engaging in the I'll Ride With You campaign. Yeah, there are women who I know have used it, have, you know, gone to Facebook and have declared that, you know, I need someone to ride with me to school or wherever, and people have rode with them. So I am seeing sort of beautiful expressions of solidarity taking place, but, you know, it's at once really sad, but as well, you know, also quite beautiful at the same time.
But when you put your headscarf on in the morning before you go out the door, do you think differently than you did maybe a couple of years ago?
Absolutely. So when I'm on the TTC and someone happens to look at me, I wonder, and if it's a male in particular, I wonder, is this gentleman going to say something to me? Does he identify me as Muslim? Is he just admiring my headscarf? Or so there's all these different things running through my head. I'm always in a sort of a mild state of anxiety sometimes, depending on the space that I find myself in. Yeah.
So Bernie Farber, when someone has to be more conscious of the fact that they are showing that their religion and how someone might react to it, what do you think?
Well, sadly, it's something I understand. I mean, as a Jew, I understand this. I mean, you know, my co-religionists, many of whom wear kippas, you know, skull caps, or the more Orthodox who have beards, walking around places like France and Belgium, have been subject to attack and are going through exactly the same kinds of fears. And it's amazing to me that in 2015, 2016, that these fears are the ones that we're having to confront. I do have a word of caution, though. I think we have to, yes, take the Donald Trumps of this world at face value for who they are, but at the same time, when we ascribe to them words like, it's a new Holocaust, or he's a fascist or a Nazi, I believe, these words empower him in a way that we then get caught into a whole different discussion and a whole different kind of situation. I think that we have to ensure that there is counter argument to this, that the good shines over the bad. But when we ascribe such power to him, I think we feed right into exactly what he's trying to do.
Okay, Khalid, what do you think?
I think his message is the same message as extremists, as Al Qaeda or ISIS or any of these lunatics. They're on the far hinges of our society. Their message of hate basically bolsters each other, and the people that believe him are basically fallen into the trap of the hate mongers, because his words are the best recruitment for these people that attack Western society. So, I mean, I'm encouraged by President Obama's word to basically root out the extremists, but not to turn one against another, not to turn us, whether Canadians or Americans, one against each other, to turn our eye with suspicion just because of someone's faith, or the way that someone dresses, or the way or the color of their skin, that's going to turn back the clock 100 years on or 200 years on our Constitution, and it's just not. It's more than just the laws. It's the values of our society. It's what we deem important.
Right.
That's why we choose to live where we live and do what we do.
Khalid Hamida, we have to end it there. Thank you, all of you, for being part of this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Khalid Hamida, lawyer and spokesperson for the Islamic Association of North Texas. He's in Dallas. Tendasai Cromwell is a writer and filmmaker. Bernie Farber is the executive director of the Mosaic Institute. They're both with me in our Toronto studio.